This is an episode of Grief for Breakfast, and we are talking about grief in the workplace. You cannot clock in or out from grief. Okay, so my intro was a little bit cheesy. You can't clock in or out of grief. But if you are an employer or a leader of any kind, maybe you work in HR or you're a team leader, whatever it is that puts you in charge of other human beings, those human beings are going to experience losses in their life that means that they are showing up with grief. We've got two things that are sort of competing with each other when you are an employer or a leader and you have a grieving employee. You want to be a human being and you want to make sure they feel welcome and supported and all of that stuff, but you also have work you need them to get done. So how do you do both? So the first thing I want to tackle is how to create an environment in your workplace that is welcoming to a grieving person. Really quick definition of grief here. Grief doesn't have to be connected to a death, although a lot of the grief that you will hear sort of presented or know about from an employee is grief related to death, but this can also be infertility losses, it can be natural disasters, anything that disrupts that normal day-to-day life or capacity, right? So grief, broad umbrella here. For today though, let's say that you have an employee that is coming back after a bereavement. They've been on your 3 days of company sanctioned grief leave and they come back into the office. What do you do with that? So often we're not sure if we should bring up the loss or if we should talk about it with them. Do they want flowers at their desk? Do they want everybody else to know about it? There are so many questions that go through the mind of a conscientious leader. So let's simplify this. Because all grief is different and all employees are different, I can't give you one policy that is going to rule them all. I can't give you, make sure everybody knows about it, make sure that you do this and this. I can't give you those specifics, but I can give you an approach. Let's say that you have a person coming back to work after a bereavement leave or a death in the family. So you have a point person who gets in touch with your grieving employee before they come back to work and say something really simple like, I know you're coming back to work next week. Do you have a sense of whether you want people to mention it to you or not mention it to you? I'm happy to go to the team and sort of prep them in advance to make it a little easier for you when you return. What you're doing there is you're giving that person the opportunity to say, you know what, I really just need to put my head down and do my job and I don't want to talk about it. There's nothing worse than coming back to work when you're grieving and having everyone come to your desk and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. When my grandmother died, it feels like you're immersed in it all the time. So to have that point person make an opportunity for the grieving employee to make a choice about that. I would rather people not ask me about it because it's going to be hard enough to hold myself together as it is. Now, the flip side of that is some people feel like everybody knows that my brother died, but I came back to work and no one mentioned it. That's weird too. This is why I said a minute ago that I can't give you a clear path of always do this. The thing you can always do is give your grieving employee a chance to make a choice. Maybe somebody says, I don't know how I'm gonna feel. Maybe if people wanna say something, they can, but I don't want an endless stream of people coming into my office. Just some working guidelines. That does a great thing for your grieving employee. It makes them think about what they might need. It makes them feel like you care about their reintegration to the office. It also lets all of your other employees feel like they have something concrete and tangible to do when that person comes back. No one knows what to do around grief, right? We think we're supposed to come by and say, sorry for your loss and share our own stories of grief or hardship. We just get weird. So if you've asked your grieving employee and they have some ideas, you are able to give that to your other employees and lessen the friction for them. This is all about creating emotionally intelligent and responsive environments. Our personal lives don't disappear the second we clock in. This is actually true if you are in office or all of your employees or some of your employees are remote, because we're still clocking in a sense. We don't want to spend the first 15 minutes of a meeting talking about all of our collected losses if that doesn't feel good to the grieving employee. Make things easier for everybody involved by having a point person talk to the grieving person before they come back. Tip number 2 for an employer or a team leader, check in with your employee about their workload. I think one of the things that we do is we try to make things easier on the person, like taking assignments away from them, putting them on light duty just as an assumption, as a gut reflex. Maybe that feels rude. Maybe that feels like if I'm your employee and you took this big job away from me, that's a real vote of no confidence in me. And again, something I said a minute ago, maybe as the employee who's returning, I need that job, that particular project as an anchor to help myself come back to work in a way that feels predictable and a way that I feel confident, right? Just don't make assumptions to the best of your ability. Don't make assumptions about what the person might be able to accomplish or not accomplish. Ask first, right? Ask first. My temptation would be to reassign this big project. I want to check in with you about how you feel about this level of work. Check in with your employee before you make arbitrary decisions. Now, I can hear the workplace voice in my head when I give you tip number 2 saying, but it's still a business and things need to get done. So yes, tip number 2 was lead with curiosity. Talk with your returning employee about their capacity, about their workload, all of that stuff. What happens though if you need them to do a certain job and they're just, to be kind of blunt about it, underperforming? It happens. Grief affects cognitive skills, it affects energy levels, it can affect interpersonal skills and the ability to communicate. Grief affects so many things. Of course, it's going to show up in the workplace. What do you do about a grieving employee who is underperforming? You got to talk about it. You need to have a discussion with that employee that manages to do 2 seemingly opposing things. Validate their human experience and talk about the expectations of the job. You can do both at the same time if you know how. What does that look like? Let's say that your employee came back to work, they were doing pretty well for a little while, you eased off a little bit just to give them a little bit of a buffer, but now they're missing deadlines, they're not delivering, they're not even answering emails half the time. This is a problem. So you can have a meeting with them. You can say, look, I know this is a really difficult time. Losing your mom impacts a whole lot of things. And I want to be sensitive to that. At the same time, I notice that you've missed this deadline and this deadline, and you haven't shown up for the last 4 meetings. I'm wondering if there's something that needs to change to help you deliver the things that we need you to deliver. Do you hear what I did there? I was a human first. I acknowledged that this is a challenging situation. I also stated where this person is not meeting my needs or the expectations of the job. I named the problem and I asked them to figure this out with me. What needs to change? Are there things that we can do differently? Do you need this reassigned? Do you need to take more time off? Because the reality is that this work needs to be done and you're not doing it. Maybe you need to take more time off. Whatever that looks like, right? Like the words in the conversation are less important than the approach of human first, stating the actual problem, and making this something that we are working on together instead of here's how you're screwing up and your job is in danger if you don't step up. Honestly, it's a nicer way of saying that. The real takeaway here is creating an environment of empathy and accountability. Now, in my ideal world, you've been doing this from the start, right? That your company culture has empathy and accountability baked into it. That's not always the case. Maybe you use this grieving employee coming back to work as an opportunity to start shifting that culture. We're looking for a win-win environment, right? Not one person wins and the other person loses. Empathy and accountability, they do actually go together if we build a culture that normalizes that.